Hi, I'm Jim Shaw from LexMedia. I'm the new chairman of the LexMedia board and also publisher of Lexington's Colonial Times magazine. I'm delighted to be here today with Jim Malloy, who's no longer the new town manager of Lexington. He's been here for over a year. I believe he arrived here in October of 2018. And have been doing some extraordinary things since you've arrived. So we really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to sort of have this discussion so the folks out there at home in Lexington can maybe learn a little bit more about your thoughts and ideas and your approach to town government and how it's been going in the year so far, and maybe a little bit about what your thoughts are going forward. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's start with a little bit about you. You came here from Westboro. Prior to that, you were at Sturbridge. So you've been in the municipal managing area for quite a while. And I noticed you were in New York for a little while before that, and you worked with the county organization. So you've had a significant amount of municipal experience. So when you arrive here in Lexington, you're bringing a wealth of knowledge. And so I guess it'd be great for people to know a little bit more about you, where you came from, maybe a little bit about your family, and how important it is to, because I remember reading an interview somewhere about it's important not to miss games and things of that nature. So
yes, so yes, I've been a local government manager now for 32 years. I have a master's degree in public administration from the University of Colorado, which is where I started out my career. I'm married. I'm actually married to the same lady that I went to my senior prom with.
Really?
We've been together for a very long time. And we have two grown kids, a 29-year-old who's a mechanical engineer in Boston and a 27-year-old who's a chemical engineer in Marlborough right now.
Wow.
And so both kids are grown, one's married. So I have no kids at home, which provides lots of freedom for me to spend lots of nights out at meetings,
Right.
which is something that I do a lot of.
grandchildren to spoil?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Not yet, we're hoping.
Yeah. But you have been very active in from the time you arrived. I mean, you attend meetings, you stay late. You're kind of a really hands-on town manager. I imagine that's just something, a skill you've acquired, or just something that's your nature.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's something that you have to do in this field. You have to be prepared for the fact that because of the nature of local government, where a lot of boards and committees that you have to work with they're volunteers that have jobs that they're at during the day. So for them to volunteer for their community, they have to have meetings at night. And
Right.
so that drives a lot of what our schedules are. And while it would be nice to think that, if you're at a night meeting that might last until 10 o'clock at night, that, you could come in a little late the next day. But for the most part, the reality is that you have meetings,
Right.
your own meetings during the day, and
Right.
so you have to be here.
I remember talking with you around the time you first arrived, and you were talking about the number of committees. Lexington is known for having quite a few committees, which speaks to the interest of our community wanting to be involved. And I think, all in all, it's a good thing. You said Westboro. You could count on two hands the amount of committees that they had there.
Yeah, we had about 20 committees,
Okay.
and the bigger problem is that we had a hard time ever filling the seats on the committees, which is not something that is that big of a problem here in Lexington. It does seem to be a lot of people who are willing to donate their time and their talents. There's a lot of people with a lot of great experience here in town and backgrounds that can really help the town. So it's fantastic that they're willing to volunteer.
Well, we're known to have a few Nobel laureates milling about in town somewhere. I don't know if they're quite involved with town government, but we do have a wealth of people who are willing to share their time and energy and their knowledge. So we're fortunate that way. So I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about some of the priorities with the budget. People talk a little bit about in town. You hear from time to time the cost and why it's so expensive to live here. The taxes and all of that. But in relation to the services, I mean, everything that the town does, they do well. It's a very well-managed town. Carl Valente, prior to you, did a great job for 10 or 11 years. And having you come in and really, really take take control, I mean, I think this town is in a good place, and I think we're in a good place for a long time to come. But people see the amount of spending that's going on in some of the buildings, and sometimes they don't quite understand. So, why we're spending this kind of money and all of that. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some budgetary priorities, or just the way we raise money and why that money is what it's put to use for.
Yeah. So one of the things that's very attractive about Lexington from a manager's point of view is that a lot of communities, what they do is they say build a road, build a building, whatever it is, water lines, sewer lines, and they put them in, and then they wait until something's about to fall down before they go in and they do maintenance, or they take care of it, or they do anything on an ongoing basis. Lexington has had a number of years where a lot of what they do, it has been to ensure that there's a sustainable program of managing and maintaining all of its infrastructure. And so if you look at how we do our road systems here, there's a whole rating system that develops what roads actually need to be paved and when they need to be paved. And the town has maintained, on top of what's available through state funding, a budget in place and an ongoing program to repair, replace roads as they are needed. And we do the same for water and sewer lines, buildings, roofs, windows, all of that stuff. And so really what we're doing is we're doing things on an ongoing basis where a lot of other communities would allow that to go and then have to borrow large sums of money to fix it. And so a lot of that type of ongoing management and maintenance is part of what drives our cost a little bit, but it drives it up a little bit in the short term, but keeps the cost down in the long term. The other thing, and people sometimes don't quite understand how this dynamic works, but in a lot of communities, almost every community, the largest single line item in the community is the school department budget. And in some communities, they get a large amount of their school spending is actually paid for by the state. The way the state education formulas work, the wealthier a community is, the less money they actually get. And it's sort of an inverse relationship there because a lot of the wealthier communities have always spent a lot more on education because their residents demand it. So whether it's Lexington or even Westboro was in the same category where they spent a lot proportionately on their schools and got very little state aid to help pay the cost of the schools. So where some communities might get 80 or 90%, Lexington, Westboro get in the 7 to 10% range. And so that alone really drives the property tax bill up in some communities a lot more than what they are in other communities.
And but the town, under the Proposition 2.5 law, I mean, you can only levy up to 2.5% over the previous year. Is that how that works?
Yes, 2.5% plus new growth.
Plus new growth.
In Lexington,
yeah.
That's something you can kind of. Lexington has stayed within Proposition 2.5 as far as its operating budget goes. It's had overrides in the past, but one of the goals of the Board of Selectmen is to not have an operating override. And so we have a revenue allocation model that we use. And what we do is we take the current budgets of the school department and the town government, and then we have shared services between the two of us, which include debt service, our facilities department, as well as some other departments. And then we total up what our total revenues are, and we calculate what the additional spending both the town and the school can have in the upcoming fiscal year. And then we've lived within that based on staying within Prop 2.5. And so we've had debt exclusions, but we have no operating overrides on the horizon at this time.
And I think it's been a little while since we've actually had an operating override.
I think so. I believe it's been 10 or 12 years.
Yeah, which is a significant period of time, because there was a time we were having them quite often.
Yeah, that's my understanding is it was about every other year for a while.
Yeah, it was. And it just, again, it speaks to how well the town is managed and, working with the unions and the folks who represent the employees. I mean, I think it's all going very smoothly. And I think some of the buildings, people look around, they see the new community center, they see what's going over at the learning center on is it Percy Road. What is the name of that street there? I can't remember, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yep. LCP.
Right, LCP, and they say, wow, it's just the acquisition of the building on Bedford Street for the temporary firehouse. Some of that is some of that done by debt exclusion.
So the building,
not a debt exclusion, but by borrowing and bonding and.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the building where the temporary fire station is, the town's actually paying that off through temporary bond notes over a 5-year period. So that'll be paid off in about a year or two.
Wow.
And then that becomes an asset of the town,
right.
Whether we sell it or we use it for some other municipal or school purpose.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, it kind of brings us to an issue that's been somewhat controversial. I know that, first of all, let's start with the good news. The good news is we've got a brand new fire station that's almost going to be online. I don't know when they had
by this summer.
By this summer.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time coming, and it looks great from what I can see. Actually, it fits. It looks almost a lot like the old one, only a little bigger. So they've done a great job to sort of conform to what it looked like, and so it doesn't stand out as a monstrosity kind of thing. But so we can, as a town, we can be happy that we've got this new facility.
Yeah.
And I know immediately following that, there's been the discussion on the police station, and to some degree, it was settled. I know they had the Board of Selectmen voted on it. It was set to go to town meeting in the spring, and then they decided to open it up, and it's kind of opened a can of worms. So I was just curious about where it stands, because a lot of people are concerned because there's a great deal of interest in keeping it in its current location. I do see some of the benefits. There are probably a few benefits to sort of moving it over to Bedford Street, but on par, I think the arguments are stronger to keep it where it is. And I'm not going to press you for your personal opinion on it, but I'm just wondering, in terms of public policy, why would it open again? And then let's sort of go back to square one to have this dialogue when it was set and ready to go. I know there's a lot of frustration.
Yeah. So when we went to have the schematic design approved by the Board of Selectmen, which was the final design before we start doing some construction documents, the cost estimate at that time to put it in the current location was about $27.5 million. The last time, about 3 or 4 years ago, that the town had cost estimates and they were looking at 173 Bedford Street versus the current location, the cost was about $22 million to do it at 173 Bedford Street. Obviously doesn't account for the inflation between now, 2017 and now, because the construction market in the area is very tight. And it doesn't account for the integrated building policy that we've recently adopted that has driven the price up a little bit by making it a green building that's also a healthy building. And so the board wanted to take a step back before we move forward and take a look and get a updated cost estimate on both locations and revisit it momentarily, but also they wanted to take a look at whether or not we could, they didn't necessarily like the exterior design of the building at the current location, because part of doing a historic renovation, because they were planning on leaving the front 2 walls. Is that you leave the historic section, but then you have to make the non-historic section look non-historic.
Right.
And so the look is not consistent with Cary and the town office building. And so the Board of Selectmen also had a question about whether or not, if the current building was completely torn down and a new one was built, whether or not it could look more like the fire station, and how the fire station fits better in that location and doesn't, like, as you were saying, doesn't really look like, it looks like the old fire station, except bigger. And so they were wondering whether or not there would be a potential to tear down the building and build a whole new building that would blend better with Cary and the town office building. And so they really wanted to see what the cost was updated for 173 at the current location with the 2 walls standing, and then at the current location with a tear down, complete rebuild.
Right.
And so we expect to have that, I believe, by like February 10th, I think is the date we're trying to put that on the selectmen's schedule. And so what that did is it pushes it off to the point where we wouldn't have good cost estimates for this annual town meeting. And so the goal is to put it on the fall town meeting. We don't believe that'll put the actual construction or final completion date off by that much.
Okay. But there is, people who are concerned say, well, there are additional costs to pushing it off. You know, some I hear some estimates $100,000 a month, blah, 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 you know, and I don't understand. I'm not an economist, so I don't know where those costs come from. But I don't know if that means because we're putting it off, you know, the economy of building sort of increases, and maybe that's it. But
and that's where that cost comes from.
Yeah, that's where that cost comes from.
Construction inflation.
Construction inflation. So the but and let me ask you, the whole idea of the maintaining the two walls, that's a historic districts commission issue.
Yes.
And that's something that they have the purview. They can require that. Okay.
Well, they can require it up to a certain point, but then there's other steps the town can take to move forward through the demolition delay process and everything. But I think really what we're looking at doing, we have a meeting scheduled next week with the HDC and our facilities department and a couple of other town officials to have a discussion about whether or not we could actually design a better building that would look better from their perspective as well. If we were to tear down and do a complete rebuild.
Right. Well, it seems to me that there's a fair amount of support for keeping it where it is. And again, like I said, I'm not going to press you for your personal opinion. That I think would be inappropriate at this point because you're negotiating and all of that. But I just know there's a great amount of concern. So I wanted to sort of let's move from there because we did touch on town meetings. So let's go there. I know that when we were talking before this, you were talking about some of the things that were coming up in town meeting that may be of interest to the community, and you know some of the expenditures that are coming up, and you were talking about the CPA projects and some of the other capital improvement issues. So let's go there.
Why don't I just
sure.
You'll have to excuse me. I have to put my reading glasses
on.
I'll just go over some of the different items that I think are highlighted out of the 45 or so articles that are on the town meeting warrant.
Sure.
The first one is, and this is really an initiative of the Board of Selectmen, is to provide some relief for senior residents that opt to do a tax deferral program. Right now, there's a sort of an interest penalty that they get when someone passes away and the family then goes to take care of the deferred property taxes and everything. From day one, they get hit with a much higher interest rate. And so the town is looking for a special act that would allow Lexington to have a 1-year delay on that.
Right. And this was I was curious about. Does it go back? You say from day one, so it goes back.
No. It goes from the day that someone passes
from
away.
the day they pass. Okay.
Yeah, and so then.
But if you say people could carry it for some significant period of time while they're getting the property prepared.
Because closing an estate could take a year or so, and so that could add significant cost to somebody. If it's public record, our average single-family property tax bill is around $15,000. If someone's been deferring the property taxes for a decade, they've got $150,000 that they could be paying 15 or 16% interest on.
That's significant.
Yes, it could add up pretty quickly.
Yep.
And so that was an initiative of the selectmen to try and make the tax deferral program a little bit better. And then on our our Community Preservation Act, we've got a number of improvements to open space areas that we're looking at doing. We have some funding going into LexHab to help them take a look at the Leary property and how that might be redeveloped. It's been a property the town has owned for some time.
I knew Mr. Leary.
Did you?
He was a character, but he did great things for the community.
Yeah, and so it's a beautiful property now.
Sure
is. Nice conservation land in the back, and the idea was to put a small affordable housing project in the front of it. And so it's stalled for a period of time, but I think LexHab is ready to move forward with it now that they've got the other Farm View property pretty much coming to completion.
They do an extraordinary job.
They do.
I really, they lost a real gem with Dave Eagle. I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to know him, but he was a giant. He not single-handedly, because a lot of those folks who were still active, like Bill Kennedy and others, the Bill is the chair, they've been with this organization since its inception in the early 80s. So
it's a unique program. It's truly unique in the entire state. It's the only one that I'm aware of that is like it, and it's created by a special act that Lexington received.
A special act, and I think they've got somewhere around 65 to 67 properties in town, and there is a waiting list to get in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a great program.
Yep.
And so then I want to talk a little bit about one of the things we're doing is we have an ongoing capital program, and one of the downsides of that, one of the management improvements that we're making right now, is that a lot of the smaller capital items that we've borrowed from, and we've had to do that because we use a lot of our reserves to fund our operating budget, about $3.5 million a year, and so we're phasing that out over the next 5 years so that we have greater flexibility to use those reserves to purchase capital, and we don't have to do short-term borrowing for small capital items. And so that'll save the town a lot of money over the period of years.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but those little things that you do, like when you can finesse this and save the town some money, and then some of the other programs that you do to save a little bit of money, it really does add up.
It adds up very quickly. One of the other things we're doing is with our water and sewer, because we have to replace the water and sewer mains on an ongoing basis, and we're doing that always. We're moving that over the next 10 years from a borrowing article to just being within the rate structure, and that alone will save us for those projects 22% and over the overall cost of doing that work.
And you mentioned before that before this started that that what we do here will have an implication for 100 years.
It will, yeah. Because we will never stop doing that work.
Right.
So we also have a proposal to do continuing design work for a police firing range at Hartwell. There is an existing one. It's an outdoor range. We're looking at the potential of making a partially indoor range that could be used by regional police agencies, police academies, the state. FBI likes to use local firing ranges. And we believe we've positioned ourselves well to be able to get state grant funds for a large portion of the project.
It sounds pretty unique. I've heard about this, and I've talked with Chief Corps about it in the past, and it does sound like it would be a popular place, and being able to sort of work with some of the other communities and do some training, and make it a revenue generator.
Yeah,
which will essentially pay for itself over time.
It could be, especially with the proximity of a lot of different departments and a couple of the police academies around here that would need to use it for training police.
Right, and I also heard that there may be some active shooter programs over there.
Yep.
And so that the inside would be set up in a way that you could train for active shooting.
Exactly.
And how to respond and all of that. So.
And then the other larger capital project we have this year is the cemetery building project, which isn't a huge project. It's a little under $4 million. And that's to replace the building that's used right now, which is pretty much a garage with an office.
I've been in it.
On the side of it, so that if...
Both of my parents reside over at Westview, so...
And so you've experienced the fact that it's not really the best place in the world to go.
Well, it's not, and they have a system. I remember going in there. My dad died suddenly, so I remember going in there, and there wasn't a computer. They had a little plastic file card, in the drawer down here. So you open it up, and the building, it was a garage.
Yeah.
So I think it's time to come into the 21st century. Is that where we are now?
Yeah. And so that's on the town meeting warrant. Let's see, what else do we have here? We're also in the process of putting some regulations in place to deal with short-term rentals like Airbnb, VRBO.
Interesting.
That'll also put a 3% surcharge on locally, so it'll be a small revenue generator for the town.
Let me ask you a question. Why wouldn't it be the same as the hotel tax?
Well, the 3% surcharge is on top of the same of what the hotel tax is.
So they would be required to pay the state tax and all of that. So you would have that's right. The surcharge goes local, but then they would be required to pay the regular.
They'd also pay the hotel motel tax.
Right, and that's a concern for people in the community, because I know there are a number of them. Like I heard figure like around 60 or so sort of active places. And it's not to target any particular company that's doing business. It's just to regulate it so that it protects the neighborhoods and the community. Right. People want quality of life, and I don't blame them. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing, and people, like we just said a minute ago, people pay on average $15,000 a year just in taxes.
People deserve a good quality of life if that's the kind of property taxes you're paying.
Exactly.
And then we have a number of citizen petitions that are coming forward. We have one that's seeking to reduce our legal expenses by bringing an attorney in-house instead of contracting out. We're not very supportive of that because the way the article's written, it doesn't really work. The numbers are way too low for us to be able to hire an attorney even.
Right. Well, you'd have one attorney, theoretically, where right now, are we still with Palmer and Dodge?
It's a spin-off of that. It's Anderson Krieger.
Anderson Krieger, okay.
We have a whole team of attorneys with different specialties.
You have a team of attorneys that are specialized in municipal law, and they all support of it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the surface, and I have to say, I was so excited when Norman Cohen decided he wanted to run for the Board of Selectmen because he had been town council at Palmer and Dodge for about 30 years. So we were then, he was, we were going to continue with Palmer and Dodge, but then we would have the benefit of having our 30-year council on the Board of Selectmen. And he did a lot of great things. And I just want to point this one thing out. I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. He did a great thing with our bond ratings, and dealing with a lot of that. But that's one of his areas of expertise, saving the town literally millions of dollars.
Oh, it does.
And so that was kind of an unsung thing. It's not shiny. It's not a capital project. You can't touch it, but it's significant. Yeah. So
I think I was telling you earlier, we had a bond rating call this morning, and it's one of the most important things that a town manager can do is really to protect, either upgrade to a AAA or once you're at AAA to protect that bond rating.
Right.
Yeah, it's very important.
It is significant. And like you say, and one of the things they look at is the way that you're managing this town by eliminating the need to borrow for a lot of things.
Yeah, and building reserves.
And building reserves. They look at that. That's an important part of the equation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got an article on the town meeting warrant to acquire some additional parking spaces.
Okay.
We've been using them for a long time. We've been leasing them from the Historic Society, and so we're looking at the potential for buying those.
Right.
Is one of the warrant articles.
Well, I would hope they understand they've got a good relationship with the town, and I'm hoping that they'll come to the table with an open mind and negotiate.
Yes.
Because I remember not long ago when we did it was sort of a public-private partnership with Edison. They had the back lot of their building that they were paying to landscape and keep up. We needed the parking, so all the parties got together and did an agreement where we would have parking meters on there. So there was no need to cut it anymore, and they got to continue doing it. It was land that they were not using at all, and it was purposeful. And we were able to add something like maybe 30 or 25 additional spots there. Yeah. And if you're ever in Lexington Center at certain times, even though I have to say that over the last few years, they've actually really addressed the parking situation. It's not nearly as bad as it was 6-7 years ago. I was a little skeptical first when I heard about the tier pricing and all of that. It seems to be working. So, yeah. Yeah.
And so then we've got a couple of different bylaws related to noise. We have one from our noise committee. Both dealing with construction noise, and then one that's a citizen's petition on construction noise, which is a little bit stricter,
right? And
would require a plan put into place by anybody constructing a new house or construction in a residential zone, especially when it comes to pile drivers and things like that seem to
that can be noisy. But it's also par for the course when you're in a community like this. And and let's face it, 10, 12 years ago when teardowns were first really coming on the scene in a big way, people were somewhat concerned. Now it's part of, what happens in the town. People do have concerns on that level economically. Are we foreclosing on our children to come back and afford this town? But people do have basic noise concerns, and there may be some ways to limit it. But some of the suggestions I've heard may be a little bit outlandish, but we'll see. It'll be debated, and we'll
exactly. And it'll depend a lot on how they frame some of the motion too, to make sure that they define things well enough that they're enforceable and that we can take action to actually do what the bylaw says.
And I think most builders are local. I think the vast majority of the builders are local, so they understand. These are their friends, these are their neighbors. So I think they're probably open-minded to at least hearing the concern. Yep. So if nothing more, I think the message gets across. So.
And then really we just have one other one looking to do, it's a couple of different bylaws looking to do some additional work as far as the Hancock Historic District and demolition delay. And it's mostly based around one property that's about to be redeveloped, that a demolition permit has been put in, and they're in their 1-year cycle. And so the interesting thing is that my understanding is it won't actually affect that one structure.
Right.
But there's 2 or 3 articles related to that. And then there's a number of zoning articles coming up for...
I know we're running close to our 30 minutes, but this is hugely important. And I don't want to stop you on what's going on in the Hancock District, because there's a great amount of concern about what's going on there. There's a lot of citizen concern. I've seen all kinds of email campaigns and all of this about this particular property, which has significant, I should say, great historical significance. So hopefully they'll be open-minded about this. But I know this is something that's important to you, the Hartwell Ave initiative. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on that.
Yes. So as you're aware, we've done some work as far as getting funding for the 25% design plans at the Fall Town meeting, and at this,
which is for the traffic.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And then because we really felt we needed to address the traffic before we did anything with zoning. Right. And so there's a group that's working on the zoning, but there's also some petitioned articles to begin doing some of the rezoning on Hartwell to allow for greater density and development out there.
Mixed use.
Yep.
And I was at the meeting that you were at, where we actually had a sit down with some of the landowners out there. And at the very end of the meeting, the simple question was asked, would you be interested? And a very simple show of hands showed that everybody in the room was open-minded to this. So there is broad-based support. There's real support. Interested. Because people will say, we went through this a number of years ago and nothing ever came from it. But this is an entirely different...
it's a different proposal than what was out there before. And I think the fact that we've funded the 25% design plans to push the... because any construction project out there will be in the neighborhood of $45 to $50 million and will be funded by the federal and state government. Right. And so to get it really out there, the town had to make the investment to do the design work.
And we have to get in line for that. That's not like something that's going to happen next year.
No.
So, but we have to be prepared, and basically addressing the traffic situation is an absolute must. Yeah. Because it's basically been something that's been holding things back for years, the jug handle issue. Yeah. Those of us who grew up here, I also remember that Hartwell Ave, there used to be 2 lanes on each side of traffic. And sometimes if you're driving and you feel like somebody's coming up on your inside, I guarantee you that somebody who's been going to Hartwell Ave for 30 years, right? Yeah, and they're still using 2 lanes, even though it's one lane in that side.
We had a meeting on that yesterday, and that jokingly comes up all the time. That's only 2 lanes, but a lot of people think it's 4 lanes.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know who's been around too long. So there are so many other things I would love to cover, and I've really enjoyed having this time with you, and I appreciate it. I know there's a great amount of work going on, and we've been addressing everything from housing and others, affordable housing. I just want to say quickly before I close off, I would love it if the town could think about affordable home ownership. We had an initiative years ago where we converted Muzzy Junior High School into condominiums, and that was an affordable program. I think the whole building was set so that people come in. Many people who were still living in Lexington started there and were able to get out of there and then buy a home in Lexington, and they're here and they still have their roots here. As we talk about affordable housing, the concept of affordable home ownership should not kind of get pushed to the back. Yeah, so I just throw it out there for consideration.
No, I agree with you. That's how wealth is generated, and with younger people, it's hard for them to get into their first homes.
Right, and when they do, when somebody's renting, they in their own mind they're transient. But when they own a home, they're putting roots down, and it makes a big difference.
It does make a difference.
I want to thank you for taking this time.
Thank you.
I know this is long overdue, so we're glad you're here. We know you're working hard. You're doing great things in Lexington. We're really very fortunate to have you.
Thank you.
And I hope you're going to be with us for a very, very long time. Anyway,
thank you.
Well, good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, Jim.